My guest today is going to be Red Sage, also known as Andrew. He is on this app. He's a wonderful human being. We've known each other for quite a few years, and I just think that it would be a really wonderful opportunity to learn a little bit more about deconstructing and what that looks like, and even some of the ways that it takes on the similar feelings of the 5 stages of grief. Hi, Andrew.
Hi,
How are you doing, love? Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yay! So to get started, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely, lovely guests, or our lovely, lovely audience?
Yeah, my name is Andrew. I'm Red Sage on here. I live in Kansas City, and I was a pastor for about 6 years and involved in a lot of both faith-based but also not faith-based nonprofit work my whole adult life.
I
There's
actually love
more,
that about
but
you.
that's a
I
bit of a intro, I
oh
guess.
no, I absolutely love that about you. So, I texted you and asked you if you would be willing to come and talk to me about your own deconstruction journey, because I have been there watching you go through a lot of it, and I've always been in awe of the way you have handled and dealt with your own deconstruction journey. And I think that your own story about it might be a big inspiration to others, mostly because I see a lot of people who are still in the angry stage, and that angry stage kind of
Yeah.
comes out at other people. Like any Christian they see is the representative of Jesus and Christianity on the whole. So to start, can you tell me a little bit about your background? Oh, you already kind of told us about your background in Christianity, but what brought you to the idea that you needed to start this deconstruction process?
Yeah, I think that so when we talk about deconstruction and just to like define that a little bit, it is encountering enough information that it requires us to remain in enough conflict with either the ideology we hold, the group we say we're a part of, how we proclaim our personal identity. It requires us to be at enough conflict with it that we either feel the need to reject certain principles, uh, claim other principles, double down on things. It's like a psychological distress, I think, in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to remain there, but that's usually how it starts. Usually, there's like an arc to it, based on your community, your culture, your anything that is tied to your personal sense of identity has in its own way its own deconstruction process, and all of us, I think, are on some kind of journey with that. I i think in some ways it was easier for me to enter into good discourse for myself around deconstruction because there was for me, Christianity was tied to everything, and there was enough of the everything that I was being told by Christians that I already found rejectable, confusing, problematic. Uh, that's and I think it's one of the pitfalls that I don't know, nationally oriented or culturally oriented religions can have. When it claims everything, all it needs to mess up is one thing for it to now destroy its own framework. Masculinity was the early one that started to fall away as something that I couldn't trust. And there were so many Christian books written on masculinity, on being a good man, on being a good preparing children to be good husbands within a certain Christian framework. Uh, that that's where it really started for me to go, well, it ain't that. At the very least, it ain't that. Um, I don't want to lose the plot, so I'll stop there. And
No, I love everything you're saying. And my question for you would be, can you pinpoint the exact moment that you went, I cannot do this in the way I have been doing it any longer?
yeah. First of all, what this would you say? Because there's a whole lot of thises, right? There's a whole lot of
Exactly.
things that fell to
So
the
let
wayside
me,
along the way.
Yeah, let me break that down a little more. At what point can you pinpoint a moment for you that you thought, I cannot exist in Christianity the way it's been presented to me, and now I need to find my own way in my own faith that might be separated from the way Christianity has been taught to me?
Yes. I think there are a lot of those moments. Um, like, you know how we arrive at the same lesson over and over again in life, but we tend to from like a deeper perspective than we had before. And so like it feels like we're walking in a circle, but if you turn it sideways, it's more like a corkscrew. Like we
Mm-hmm.
arrive at the same point, but it's deeper. I think a lot of my life has had that corkscrew effect. The first moment that I can remember going, well, not this. I was I was in a youth group when I was in elementary school, and there was a teacher there who I did not like or respect, and that made it easier. And he said that if someone were to die before being baptized, that meant they would go to hell. That's what that meant. Like that was the lesson to the youth group. And I immediately rejected that. Like I just knew fundamentally, well, that's not true, and I knew that my parents also didn't believe that. So I had already experienced like this cultural shift in Christians, even around what it meant to go to heaven, right? And I was already experiencing and seeing these things. So he said that. I looked across the room. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, is in that room, and I mouthed, "This guy doesn't know what he's talking about." And he saw me mouth it and
Oh,
yelled at me in front of the group. And I was not
oh,
squeamish about adults yelling. Like it may have affected. Like I had a lot of anger in me already, so I was ready to throw down. That's just how I was kind of wired at that point in my life and in my childhood. But it was this clear moment. As soon as you said it, that's the first thing that popped into my mind because, and that may seem small in some ways and scary in others, but just to name the pieces of it, right? This was an adult with extreme confidence expressing to a room certainty around his faith when I had already heard other adults with extreme confidence express an opposing certainty around their faith, and it had to do with eternal life. It was already happening. And when confronted, and not even confronted, just a child disagreeing, it was so distressing for them that they had to yell in public. That was a wild experience that opened my eyes to go, there's a lot of confidence with people having no clue what they're talking about.
that
And
makes absolute sense.
that was the early thread. And some people may be listening to this and going, well, yeah, I've experienced that too. But please think about this. These are adults with extreme confidence that are trying to impose on children in a space where there are already disagreements whether or not they will go to heaven or hell, and we can't even agree on that, right? That opened up enough room for me to go, I can't trust everything I hear, I can't trust everything I read, but I can know with certainty that I don't want to be that kind of certain.
Absolutely. I hear you. I had a similar experience when I was younger. I had a friend invite me to church. I was 12 years old, and my mother always encouraged me to learn about other faiths. And I would do the opposite. I would say to any friend who invited me to church, I'd love to. Would you like to come to synagogue with me? And this person said yes. And I was in, I guess, what would be called a youth group. And the pastor of this youth group was informing these children that Jews still had a golden calf in our synagogues. Still. Not that it happened at one point, but it was still happening now. Now, this was the Assemblies of God. Uh, and so I, of course,
Makes
being
sense.
Jewish, was like, I'm sorry, but that's not the case. Like, our ark contains the Torah scrolls. There's no cow, there's no calf there. And being about 12 years old, I was a precocious child myself, and said that I drank milk and I didn't bow down to it. And this required the woman's husband to admonish me on the bus home that I gave his wife a hard time. And I said, well, if your wife was more informed, she would not had that hard time. Needless to say, that was the last time I went with that particular friend. And that brings me to kind of a, do you think that this kind of fear, like you were saying, you were presented with fear of this hell concept at a very early age? If you aren't
Yeah.
baptized first, you're going to hell. Do you think that that is a way that Christianity tried to keep people within Christianity by scaring them into, if you don't believe us, you're going to this eternal conscious torment?
Yes. But I don't think that's because it's Christianity. I think it's much more, I think there's a much more boring answer to why that happens. I think any group that loses its relevance in doing meaningful work is required to either change its identity to become meaningful or change to a tactic of either self-importance or fear. And I think that's companies that are trying to compete in other markets. I think that's clubs trying to get enough members in high school. And I think that's world religions. When, if we cannot find a way to prove that we have enough meaningful relevance in how we function, religion, company, or club, then we have to turn into a sense of self-importance or fear. Like these little country churches that some of them hold deep meaning in their community. Those potlucks are community centers. It's the closest this community will have to a third space. I'm not disparaging that. What I am saying is when certain small church communities stop becoming relevant, they aren't important to their city. If they went away, nothing really changes. They aren't important to the functions of their people's lives other than they would need to find a new thing to do on a Sunday morning. They have to either declare everyone who's there super important and everyone who's not there not important, or they have to reinforce, hey, this space is to make sure you do not, that something bad doesn't happen to you. Isn't it good that you have this insurance? So yeah, I think Christianity, I would like to say Christianities. I think a lot of the Christianities that exist need fear because they're no longer relevant.
That makes sense. I would agree that I believe that some sects of Judaism do the same thing, whether or not its basis is in the Torah or our foundational understanding. Seems not to be as important to some sects who want to keep Jews, really keep Jews within Judaism. Now, you mentioned that this was an early formation for you, this youth group experience. And yet, as you mentioned earlier, you still went on to become a pastor. So what was the impetus that still drove you towards that?
That's a great question. I think that from an early age, there was such a difference in that confidence of different groups that I saw different denominations of Christianity as practically separate religions. And now I would say that I would think that that is the case. I think that there is enough difference in how the Southern Baptist down the street interacts versus the Episcopal Church. I think there's enough difference there that we should say, in the same way that Islam and Christianity have the same deity, these different religions of Episcopalian and Southern Baptists have the same deity, but they're fundamentally different religions. That's my
Absolutely.
personal.
No, I agree with that. Was there anything in your time as a pastor that you felt like you were doing differently than the pastors that you grew up around? And what was that like for
Yeah.
you?
I think I still debate whether or not my movement in the church world was me already investing in self-importance or not. You know, like I think there may have already been some of that. Maybe there was already such a lack of cultural relevance that I was already investing in self-importance. If you're just joining, I mentioned earlier that I think the reason Christianity uses fear and also self-importance is because it it is a tactic when they notice they no longer have cultural relevance, that they don't meaningfully do work in the community, they don't meaningfully participate in spaces. And so they need something to keep people involved and keep their identity in cultural critical mass. And so they need fear, they need self importance. I'm not entirely sure that I wasn't already investing in self importance when I went, I'm doing it differently than them. See what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
but what I liked about the movement that I was a part of, it was an independent Christian movement that invited all who shared just a bare bones basics agreement to be considered the same group. So like edging up to universalism is where it was. And
Okay.
now, although the church I was a part of was conservative, and I would say partially, if not mostly, because it was in a conservative area, I felt like I was doing things differently. I created spaces while I was there and used my influence to encourage a certain involvement and emboldening of care for the poor and homeless, and a certain invitation of queer folk. There was work that I remember doing from day one that caused me a lot of that got me in trouble a lot, but also I felt like I was doing things differently enough to keep doing it for as long as I was able to do it.
That absolutely makes sense. I often tell people in Judaism that as a rabbi, my job is to be in service to my people. And while my job is to keep Jews in Judaism, the way that I navigate that path differs and deviates from the way my fellow colleagues would do. So that leads me to this. Do you feel like I know you mentioned self-serving, but do you feel like you maybe are being a little harsh on yourself in that you also wanted to be in service to people in a different way than people had been in service to you?
Reluctantly, yeah. And the reason I can say yes today that I'm being hard on myself is because of the students that I have had that have reached back out, that I'm close enough with, that I've been able to say, here are fears, that they were able to say, like there's one guy, he is a conservative person in many regards. In the American lens, he's more moderate, but he is a very conservative person. But he recalls being taught by me to make sure that when gay couples showed up, they got treated with refreshing invitation. Not equal. Equal doesn't count because that doesn't feel welcoming, and it's not a safe space. So a refreshing degree of invitation. And because I did that, they did that, as he told me. So I know I made a difference. I know things and policies changed. I know there are certain things that changed in my city because of the work that I did. And I know I wanted to be the person for people that I didn't get. Um, but you can't help but double back, right? And go, and is that enough? Which is such a critical lens that we would not impose on other people, but we impose it
Absolutely.
on ourselves.
Absolutely. I think about that a lot. I don't know if while you were on the job that you felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I know I do. I mean, I've been on the job for 7 years, and there's lots of times where I will say to my colleagues, I will say to my family, am I actually helping anyone? Why would anyone want to listen to me? I'm a podunk rabbi in the middle of nowhere. And I have to then remind myself that no matter where I am acting from, I'm doing so in a positive manner, or at least no matter how much I struggle, I'm still trying to.
Yeah, I can say with confidence up until about the end that was my posture.
Yeah,
It was my everything. Um, because I genuinely believed I was making a difference. I think I did make a difference. It just reached a point where I could not prove that the difference that for me, my story, no one else's. For me, I could not prove the difference that I was making was worth the cost of making it. Like
absolutely.
all the things that I had to swallow, all the things that I had to tolerate, all the denial of myself that had to exist just for me to be seen as valuable in that space. it just stopped working. And who knows, maybe if it was a different space in a different city, it would have been different, but that would have also not been a city connected to my experiences. It wouldn't have been a city where I would have been able to make the same changes. So it kind of is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, sort of like we often say to ourselves, I wish I was different, but all of the experiences we've had that led us to this point is what make us who we are now. And if any of those had changed, we wouldn't be the same person. Now,
Exactly.
you mentioned earlier about the way that Christianity taught you masculinity.
Yes.
When you were talking to or finding that your masculinity didn't match the way that you were taught, how did you internalize that? And do you think that is one of the reasons why you decided I need to separate from this idea of masculinity that is presented in Christian hegemony?
Yeah, I think there's so many good things there. So um just like how I'd say that different denominations of Christianity might as well be different Christianities, I think that there are different masculine expressions. And sometimes it's not as clear as the denominational lines, right? It's not as clear. Sometimes it takes as little as a pastor who is emotionally healthy in some kind of way for the culture of masculinity within a church space to be different. Sometimes it takes something that small. I would say that there were
So to go to go back, I absolutely love what you said, and I have a question about that. I notice in my own religion that there are definite gender lines
yeah.
between men and women, and in some of our more strict sects, they are separated completely. Is this something that you found in your denomination, where women stayed with women, men typically stayed with men, unless there were like what we call a shidduch, or somebody was dating, and other than that, it was more where pastors taught femininity, pastors taught masculinity, and they didn't really come together. They didn't really coincide.
Yeah, there were some pieces to that that just did not make much sense to me from the beginning. Um, so I learned most of the things that I've learned about the world as a person from women. I've learned a lot of the skills that I have learned, tactics, ideas, skills from men. That was my early life, right? And so from a very early age, something that never really made sense to me is that women couldn't teach men how to exist in the space around them. Because, like, it wasn't like I was showing up and, like, the only way you could enter a room is a Spartan kick and an axe throw. Like, it just didn't ever, and it was never something that extreme. It was always like, look people in the eye when you're talking to them. Ask questions when people tell you things about themselves. Check in on people. Those are all, depending on how you frame it, either extremely feminine or extremely masculine traits, and it depending on the cultural space too, right? So it never made sense. The presentations that I got in the hyper framing of all things masculine are for marriage and fatherhood, and all things feminine are for marriage and motherhood, was just something kind of shoved down our throats in literature, but did not coincide with the expressions that happened in all these various spaces. So, like, there's this book, I forget their name, a couple wrote it, The Ludies, Ludy. And, this guy was trying to present a masculinity. One of the chapters was called Poetic Warrior, to be the poetic warrior, so like an emotionally present but strong man. And so the idea was being a good husband. I was 10 when I was reading this stuff, and so it was just like, yeah, because it was all about, oh, you're gonna date. Well, dating's only for marriage, and so let's teach them about marriage. And by marriage we mean fatherhood, and by fatherhood we mean being a man. This is something a 10-year-old needs to learn. So there was something that definitely hijacked a lot of my thinking about myself and about women and about dating, and oh my goodness, the anxiety whenever I liked someone of, okay, if I like them, they're the one, right? But if I'm wrong, then I'm dating them. And what if the one finds out I'm dating them and then I miss the one and then I miss God's plan for my life? And do I go to hell after that? Like there, so many young women got ghosted by me because I was having a panic attack on them not being the one. It was that was the real reason. And so I think what it was partially the hypocrisy, the double speaking out of both sides of the mouth about what masculinity is, but then it was also the overbearing weight and anxiety that came from trying to occupy it that made it feel both irrelevant and impossible. And so I just eventually I threw it. It helps that I didn't feel at home in like manness. But beyond that, I think there was just too much pressure too early on what it meant to be a man. The odd adultification of young boys to learn what it means to be a man so early when they should be thinking about playing with toys or playing with their friends, helped with the overall distrust of the Christian spaces I was in, because they were saying this is what God wanted. I was like, well, if God wants that and I'm miserable, then that can't be it.
I absolutely see that in a lot of Christianity as well as Judaism. Oftentimes when people on the outside look at Judaism, they say, oh, that is a better religion. And I will say, we are not any more less prone to misogyny, to toxic theology as any of our religious counterparts. So I think that just because we're more insular, people just can see us from the outside. When you were talking about the way, as you were discovering your own masculinity, how that didn't quite coincide with the masculinity that you were presented with or that you were taught, how did that, or did it lead you into deconstruction? And then my follow-up is, when you started on that path, did you find yourself going through these stages of grief? Because that is something that I've noticed in the deconstruction community is they're grieving at first. They're grieving a loss, especially if you've been spent a lot of time in the religion, as you're learning new things, as you're deconstructing that faith path. You literally, I've seen people go through these 5 stages of grief. And are you still going through it? Are you on the other side of it yet?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, yes, there was a grief when and I am irrevocably masculine. Like this body runs one way. I'm just like, I just got this man body regardless. That's just where I'm at in life. It doesn't feel like home, but it's the apartment that I'm probably going to permanently rent. And it's, I think what for me was the biggest breaking point for this masculine Ponzi scheme that I was handed within Christianity, or at least the Christian spaces I occupied, was the policing from other men. It was so obvious that what we were concerned about, Christianity doesn't always teach you how to have friends, but it does teach you how to have an agenda. Where you have maybe not necessarily friends, but you have brothers and sisters in Christ who could also end up being a wolf in sheep's clothing. You don't necessarily have friends that are outside of your faith sometimes, but you do have the lost that you're trying to shepherd. So there's always like this deep agenda tied within evangelical spaces to every single relationship you come across. Marketing should study how effective this is at getting people to constantly think about being involved in one space or another. If we can motivate that towards like social movements and justice, the world would be a significantly better place. I think the thinly guised homophobia and really just the genuine hatred of femininity and women that comes out of Christian masculine spaces made it really difficult to ever be comfortable, to ever allow yourself to be close to another male, unless you are in this little insular group trying to model some kind of healthy emotional transparency. Like, it would be something as little as a pose in a photograph that could lead to someone asking you to go to coffee and go, why are you portraying yourself this way? That seems flamboyant. I think that you are engaging in feminine behavior. It was to that extent that, an encouragement of self-policing to that degree existed in conservative evangelical space. What led me to end up, pursuing being a pastor was encountering a more emotionally secure masculine group, a group that showed up and said, hey, are you okay? How are you? Hey, I hear this other person's struggling. You can cook, right? Let's go cook them some food. Like, that was such a bare bones basic act of care that was centered in this space. But that was refreshing enough for me to go, maybe there's space for me in Christianity still. And that was in college. So, um, what I ended up encountering was, I think, a lot of my anger, which was also part of my grief, got to be masked and disguised as being prophetic. So it wasn't that I was angry and grieving. It's I just had a hard word for someone to hear. And I think a lot of young men get to hide their emotions in conservative Christianity as some kind of spiritual expression when actually they're just hurting. Um, is this sadness? No, it's a spirit of sorrow. It's the Holy Spirit engaging with my heart. Is this, am I angry? No, I just have a word from the Lord about the problems around me. And by spiritualizing absolutely everything, it gave this strange, comforting. It was like the bumpers were on the bowling alley, and as long as there was a Christianese version of being able to say it, I had the freedom of emotional expression
So
and emotional.
you were able to kind of resolve yourself and or absolve yourself, kind of separate your actual grief and anger and reframe it as Christianity. Reframe it as, this is the way that I'm meant to be, I'm meant to feel, because then I can go in and do God's work. This must be something I'm supposed to engage with.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm not going to say that's true for everyone. I'm not going to say that was true for me at all times, but I can think of many moments where my hurt became a sermon when what it needed to be was hurt. My anger became a prophetic word when really I just needed to be angry at the way I was being treated and people like me were being treated in the world around me. Um, the combination of evangelicalism and social media has created every emotion to become both spiritual and needing to be on stage.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of a danger that I think the evangelical world never really knew was coming, and the opportunity now, and I don't think this is just true for Christianity. I think a lot of our ethics and a lot of our spaces have not caught up with our technology, and we seem to have a perpetual advancement in technology without making sure our ethics are grounded in preventing oppression, in making sure there was not too much of a foothold for the overly powerful or predatory. A lot of our advancements in a lot of our spaces did not catch up fast enough, and now there are victims. So I, but I think that is true for Christianity in the same way it's true for almost everything else. That the public stage that happened overnight, where everything is available and you can perform everything, and there is not room to just have emotions, but there is room to have spiritual gifts. And so now we have a lot of young guys. I've seen them online who they're 19, they're 20, they're younger than that, who are becoming internet pastors when what they really need is a therapist. but that's the
I
only space that they're going to get to actually
absolutely.
express their emotion.
I mean, that definitely resonates with me, as well as the way you spoke about turning your own emotions into some kind of sermon or education. Um, Prior to my own kind of, which you already know about, I would do the same thing. I, instead of just sitting in the pain or the anger, I thought constantly, how can I use this to serve others? When really, in doing so, I was not allowing myself to heal or serve myself or just sit in it. And the other part that really resonated with me is the way you said that your body is kind of the apartment you're renting. Again, also going back to conversations you and I have had where I'm like, you know, so I absolutely understand that. And I've had the honor of watching you sort of experience this in real time. I met you
Mm.
because on this app because of the way that you were engaging with your own self and trying to figure out where you were. And I came across you because someone sent me a video of yours, what, 2.5, almost 3 years now. And I was like, that
Wow.
is remarkable. This person is remarkable. And so I have to watch. And then I remember I engaged with you over something Hebraic, and bam, here
Oh,
we
that was
are.
fun. Yeah.
Here we are. Um, so what was those beginnings like for you when you were first saying, you know what, I'm learning more, and I want to live fully in a way that brings me joy and brings me, you know, peace.
Well, first, I need to double back and say that I've thoroughly enjoyed the relationship we've been able to build.
Thank
You're
you.
wonderful, and I really appreciate you. And there is a certain kind of resonance that I think I get to experience with you. And from what the way you speak, it seems to be reciprocal. Um, we have landed in different spaces in some ways, but in the exact same space in others. And it's just been really fun to meet someone and connect the way that we've been able to. So thank you.
For me as well.
Uh, Good. I'm glad. I'm so it's odd every once in a while to speak to your question about like what was it like in those early days to come out of that. It was really odd the way that this very so I think our society is deeply patriarchal, but in no way encourages masculine self-love. And so it is in some ways it seems to be a society built on the performance of men, but in no way the health and goodness of men at all. Um, but every once in a while, it'll do something weird that lets there be a gateway for self-expression. Queer Eye and metrosexuality became this saving little moment in culture for me because in some ways there were these guys that was like that's just gay washing yourself or whatever people said, and but it was like this open door for a kind of masculine expression that was being honored culturally that meant that I wasn't going to get bullied, I wasn't going to get picked on, I wasn't going to get hurt if I expressed myself in these ways. So there was something about just getting the permission to feel. There was a season where I bet everything in my closet that I owned was just brown or blue or black. And, and what I really wanted to do was just wear colors. And I was so jealous of these guys that were like snowboarders who would just wear these bright, colorful things and just like, and it was just, I was like, I didn't know how to break out into that until I started expressing myself a little differently, wearing my jeans a little bit tighter, wearing nicer shoes. In a weird way, the megachurch world helped in that because they were expressing a form of masculinity that was also very where men could just be like really well kept, handsome, good looking, and it gave me permission to engage in a form of self care that I hadn't before, and made me feel like I had the permission to express my confidence in those spaces when before I wasn't letting myself. Um,
I've seen you in pink and you look great.
Thank you. I like, and I still lie a little bit when people are just like, "Oh, lavender" or whatever. Like my phone case is lavender, my watch is this pink color. I'll say, "Well, like this was the cheapest Fitbit." It was the cheapest Fitbit. I also just really liked the color, and I'll still like even lie to this day a little bit because I don't know if a stranger is safe. But I think it really didn't come to a head until I first started coming out to people that I wasn't just attracted to women. That's when I still had in my head such a binary that I wasn't allowed to be feminine unless I also acknowledged that I wasn't straight, which is like a kind of a weird. I did not know at the time that I was operating under such a strong binary, and I did not know at the time that I was associating gay with femininity intrinsically, but that was the next step. That's what I needed to do next, was to when I let myself admit that I wasn't straight, I was also letting myself admit that I could be feminine, because at the time those were the same thing.
I absolutely, absolutely understand that for similar reasons. I performed femininity my entire life. I had that women act a certain way. We are demure. We are, almost simpering to the men around us. And I was not that. I was performance. It was all acting for me. And then the day that I said, I am not going to wear these dresses that don't feel like me. I want my body. I want to look at myself in the mirror and love my body. And it was my wife who said, have you guys thought about kilts? Why don't you get yourself one of those utility kilts? Maybe that'd be nice. And I did. Put on a t-shirt, stopped wearing tickle, put on a beanie, looked in the mirror and was like, oh, there you are. And luckily my wife said, I love the androgyny. That was one of the things I was terrified, is that she was now going to look at me because I wasn't the high heels and low cut dress and I know you've seen it. I had a couple of videos out where
Yeah.
I was like, I love being Jewish and I have the whole thing. And I thought if I didn't perform that, she would not look at me the same way. And when I came out with the kilt and just a t-shirt and that, she looked at me and was like, I dig it. Let's do this. And I'm like, really? I mean, I could have been doing this for years. Like it was.
Yeah.
So I feel similarly of what you're talking about. Do you feel like
It,
you tried to almost negotiate your way back into this belief? Like I know that we see anger, then we kind of see negotiation. If I do this, maybe this will happen. Did you find yourself in that kind of space?
yes. It was a being at a place that I knew there were certain versions of safety for gay people, but in reality, there was not total safety, and there never was going to be. When I knew that that was the case in the church that I was working at, and I was admitting to myself fully, like saying to myself, yeah, this is me too, though. I just get to pass, which has been a big part of the whole journey. In every space, in every way that I actually am, I pass as what this overarching dominant society, at least I pass in some ways in all of those categories, and just continue to. So it was odd being in rooms with people that didn't think that gay people were in the room and hearing the way they talk. It was odd being in white rooms and thinking that there was no one of color in the room and hearing the way that they talk. And it was very telling when people decided that you were not any of those things, and the casual snide remarks and jokes and whatever it is. Um, so it I guess I came to the conclusion, well, if I can make a room that is safe in this homophobic church, then it justifies the homophobic space. If I can be honest with a couple of people and just get a little bit of an expression, then that's enough for me. If I can call every time that I am acting on stage and happen to end up as the character in drag, just acting, and let people think it's funny, then that can be enough of an expression for me. Um, if I can really enjoy theater and be really, really good at doing my own makeup and other people's makeup and enjoy that in theater space, then that's enough. That's enough for me, and that was enough until it just wasn't. It was
I
enough until it
absolutely hear
wasn't.
you. I remember having a conversation with you where I said, I know you're not a white guy. And you were like, well, and I was like, okay, but you kind of lean into this idea that people see you as a white person, and you don't need to do that, especially with me. I was like, I am not a white person. I'm a mixed native. And I was trying to make that space for you. You don't have to constantly be the on, you know, person. You can, and especially because I come from Mexican heritage, machista. Men have to be machista at all the time. And so I never understood that. So I was kind of like, I want to make that room for you where you feel safe enough that if you need to show emotion, I'm not going to laugh at that. I'm going to honor that, because there's no such thing as machista unless you want it to be that way.
I remember that conversation, and that meant a lot to me. It is difficult to hold the tension to go. I know that there are some people that will always be treated as second class citizens because of their race. And so it is hard to know that honestly, and then ever try to have a conversation on my end about when I was not treated like a white person. Because and it is such a mind fuck. To walk in a room and watch white people evaluate and then decide that you're white and then give you your rights back and stop treating you with this like indignation, and these microaggressions just come out and even make jokes about it along the
Mm-hmm.
way. It does something to you to just watch in real time them go, which category am I going to put you in? This one? Then I'm going to treat you better. And
Yes.
it is, and also I'll admit that it's also nice to experience that evaluation in rooms that are not white rooms, because it is nice to not be treated like the problem, but also I've been able to benefit from the problem for so long that it's fair when I am treated like the problem,
I
because
definitely hear that.
that's an accurate assessment. That's a fair thing. And it just makes it hard to talk appropriately, right? Like I looked like this in post 9/11 Appalachia.
I hear you. Yeah, I absolutely hear you. My son, he's now 22. He started growing a mustache and a beard by the time he was 12. Well, his first week in high school, someone accused him of having a explosive device in his backpack, and he's witty and he's kind of pushy and he's got dark skin, and he was like, well, not today. I got a call from the police.
Yeah, that's not.
And I was just like, and I think that to some degree, and I don't know if you've experienced this, especially in kind of religious spaces, people tend to fetishize you because you don't look. I get a lot of, what are you? A
Yep.
human being? Where are you from? Nevada. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, I know what you meant, but I was
Yeah.
born in Nevada. And you look exotic. I don't know if this is something you've experienced, but I get that as almost, it's supposed to be a compliment. Like they're gearing up to ask me out. Wow, your looks are so exotic. That is not the compliment you think it is. It really
Yeah, I'm
is
not
not.
food.
You're just otherite. You're just othering me. And yes, exactly. Treating me like I'm something that you want to eat. And I'm married. So, you know,
No,
I'm
it's all of that, and
all
I
of it.
used to love it because I got attention, and it made me feel important.
Yep.
Until I realized it had nothing to do with who I was. It had
Nope.
nothing to do with it.
It, it was a literal fetish. Oh, I never can say this. Fetishization.
Fetishization.
Yeah, fetishization. That's what
I
it
have to like
was.
see all the syllables in my head to get that one right. That one's hard. yeah, it's and being in a white megachurch space, anytime I spoke from stage, someone would ask me something like, "Are you part of the Spanish ministry?" Um, um, I thought that it's like, you cut that beard, you're gonna look like one of those terrorists on TV. Like it was all this like deeply. It was either I'm racialized and sexy, or I'm racialized and dangerous, or I'm racialized and should be pitied. It was never I'm
Yep.
racialized and valuable.
Just for being an existence in the world. I would get, and I still to in some extent, you don't look Jewish. Oh, I didn't know. What are Jews supposed to look like? What do you mean you're indigenous? You don't look indigenous enough. Or, oh no, I can tell you're indigenous. So what is it like to be indigenous? I don't know. What's it like to be white? It's just I exist in it. I don't know how to explain that. It's just a place that I exist in. And part of that also
Well,
kind of
but
push.
also that right there. But like people like you and me, we actually do know what it's like a little bit to exist in it, but also be treated like we don't exist in it.
There it is.
And it's this weird middle ground where we don't really relate to either group fully, but we do have evidence, like in one room, like a study, that these people that say they're not racist do actually treat you differently,
Yes, they do.
inherently differently, if they've decided you are or are not white.
Yeah, I
And
told my
it's,
wife I'm we're like Schrodinger's in mixed people because
yeah,
it's like in some spaces I get told over and over again, you do not have a right to speak on this issue because you're white. And when I say I'm actually indigenous and I was raised by my indigenous family, not by white family, so I'm less understanding of white things. I'm more understanding of indigenous. No, no, but your skin color. So you automatically are white. And I'm like, I understand that I have a great deal of privilege for being light skinned, or it's the other way around. I'm not white enough. And so I am ostracized and judged by not being enough in white spaces, or judged like none of these things occur to you or happen to you because you are too light skinned. My own wife has said to people who have screamed at me in public to go back to my own country, all kinds of crazy stuff. And we did have an incident here on this app where somebody just could not help themselves. They had to scream at me that I was white, and my wife stepped in and said, "Have you ever been with her in public?" We know the app tends to put filters over people that make them look whiter than they are. But have you ever been with my wife in public when people are screaming at her to go back to her own country, or targeting her to be pulled out of line and checked at TSA when no one's being checked, but suddenly they got to check me for residue? And I'm like, what am I going to do? What do you think is in this tickle? A bomb? Like, there's nothing in there. It's just my hair. So, and I think that's part of some things that make me wary of other religious groups, because they tend to be, unfortunately, Christians who do this. Do you feel that you're still in it? Like you're still deconstructing? Do you think that's an
yeah,
ongoing process?
yeah, I do. Like racially, ethnically, I separate those. Religiously, um, there was an arc that I learned a long time ago about deconstruction, but it wasn't called deconstruction at the time. It was knowledge, epiphany, um, rebellion, renegotiation, reclamation, and then new identity. And so basically, like, you have to go through such an aversive like rejection of whatever it was. Um, you have to go through some kind of aversive rejection, but eventually you get the opportunity to reevaluate and go, well, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What are the good things I learned from these spaces? Like reclaiming my understanding of Appalachian folk magic, for example, required me to reclaim the Bible in a way that I didn't know I was ready for, but I am. Because the like Christian scriptures, and to a certain extent, I would also say like Hebrew scriptures, are also a part of this smaller Appalachian community, but read in a very different way, read like a magical text. Um, and so taking the time to see, hear, and appreciate that just changed the conversation for me a little bit. Racially, I'm still deconstructing because, like, I hear what you say about your experiences in public. I think, especially when I was in Appalachia, um, looking this way, and yes, I'm darker than this in person. Like I see myself online, and then I see myself in the mirror, and it's like, Jesus, what happened?
Right?
It's
Like
like
this.
I'm
I
darker
am
than this.
not this
I
light
don't.
in
Yeah,
person.
it well by a lot. Like my child though looks like she came from the factory that made white people. It makes no sense. Like she's blonde, curly hair. Her photo belongs on a milk carton from the 1950s.
Yep.
I
I
don't know
have
where this kid
children
came
like
from.
that too.
When I was playing with her, and I was in Appalachia, and I would say mostly, especially in the foothills, away from the mountains where all the ethnic folk are. When I was with white Southerners, I'm chasing around this white child, and it wasn't until her mom showed up, who is like neon honky white. It wasn't until then that they went, "Oh, okay, he's safe around this kid. I know what those
Mm-hmm.
experiences are like." Um, and receiving those microaggressions. But when it comes to like public discourse, the reason you won't ever see me make a video about it is how can I? I'm just gonna say the thing. Can I just say the thing?
Say the thing.
There are people that are almost entirely white or white passing that claim the title of Melungeon, who only claim it when they have been caught being overtly racist.
Yes.
And it wears me out because, one, yeah, you don't look like it to me either. You look like you came from the same factory as my daughter.
Yep.
And it's and your experiences have been in such an intrinsic white privilege that you think that because you can claim some identity, it prevents you from upholding white supremacy, and that's not how this stuff works. So
Absolutely.
and,
Absolutely.
and so I don't want to add to that concert, right? I don't want to swim in those waters, and that's why I don't make those videos. But it's it is difficult for us to engage in that other piece of what white supremacy does. It needs a constant culling of cultural identity to continue thriving. And so that's the reason we still see mockery of like Irish people, Scottish people,
Mm-hmm.
hillbillies in Appalachia, because that is not approved whiteness in its fullest degree. Does it come with white privilege? Absolutely, in some ways, as long as the accent is not present, as long as the dress is assimilated, as long as there is a full assimilation into the most appropriate image of whiteness, then all those privileges hold suit. Um,
Absolutely. I would agree
it,
with you.
it, it is hard to have that conversation well. And so for myself, when it comes to like ethnic identity, it has been interesting going from Appalachia to then go to Central Florida for a little while, where for there, for all intents and purposes, I either look like a light skinned Cuban or I look white. And then I
Yep.
come here where there's in Kansas City, where there's every racial and ethno group in this under the sun. It is interesting to just be placed as more of my experience thus far has been one where, I mean, I haven't been pulled over once here. I got pulled over with, I'm not going to talk about that. The way I got pulled over in Appalachia is some pretty scary stories.
I believe it.
But,
I absolutely believe it. And I find that
but
happens with me where I'm out with my children and people will ask straight up if I adopted them because I have some blue-eyed, blonde-haired children. And my oldest son, Vincenzo, he went to pick up his younger brother who is very dark. They didn't believe that they were related. The parents called me and said, there is a white boy here trying to pick up your son. And I'm like, yeah. And he's standing there like, I am Mexican. What do I have to do? Like, arriba, arriba. Like, what do I have to do? That is my brother. And they called me and I was like, yes, that is his brother. He can pick him up. I didn't know you had white looking. Did you adopt him? And I'm like, no, I didn't adopt him. He just came out that way. The copier just ran out of ink. I don't know. Like, I don't know what to say. But I find that, and I wonder if the. So I know that you have other things to do, but I do have one like question. Do you think that the role that white supremacy plays in American Christian evangelicalism helped you as you're deconstructing to go, this is definitely not something that I want to participate in any longer?
100%.
I think those two are so intrinsically connected. This idea of white supremacy in Christian evangelicalism, it's like you can't separate them. And then my real last question is, for me being Jewish, deconstruction is a foundational product of our faith. We are constantly wrestling with the text. We are constantly wrestling with our place in the world, with our place in, with other people, with our community. And so deconstruction, when I first heard this idea of deconstruction, it was wild to me because I was like, you guys don't do that already? I thought that was just what you do. You know, you're constantly going back to the text going, what else am I getting from this? You're constantly, we have literal holidays that are dedicated to introspection and digging out things that we don't like about ourselves and examining it and then doing better. So I heard, and it was from here, TikTok, that I heard this deconstruction. And I'm like, you guys don't already do this? So do you think that everyone, even if they stay within the faith, could benefit from that kind of critique and introspection about their place in Christianity and relevance to the world?
Yes, wholeheartedly, yes. It's I think that to speak to tie into what you said about as a Jewish person going through the deconstruction process, as you know, so much of the Hebrew scripture is tied to the Christian canon for Christians. The only way that we can engage with those texts, honestly, many of them, is to go through a constant redefining process. Otherwise, it's missed. And I realize that a lot of that is also more encapsulated in rabbinic texts, but it is also very much within the Torah. It is very much within, like, well, I'd say the Ketuvim is probably a stronger like collection piece where you find, well, no, in the prophets. So anyways, so
yeah,
it's all over the place.
It's in there.
All over the place. It's all over. So I think that there would be a more honest Christian expression if it was prone to reevaluation. There would probably also be I am hopeful to say that there would be a less white supremacist Christianity if there was a clear evaluation. And to answer your earlier question, 100% did the white supremacy that existed in those spaces make it a whole lot easier to leave. 100%.
I wondered about that. And I know I said one last question, but I actually have one last question, and I apologize for that. And that is, how has your deconstruction path changed your ideas of deity?
Ending on a light one, I see.
You know, I do what I do.
I'm so much less scared and so much more curious. I find myself, I never landed in the naturalist camp of just like, I just never landed there. I'm not saying that people shouldn't, I'm saying I didn't. So I've always been a supernaturalist. What has changed is I found myself, so someone asked me a question recently about the Trinity and the Bible, and the conclusion of the video that I've been working on is this: instead of deciding that the answer is wrong and so we should pick a different answer, maybe return to the question that inspired the answer, because that question is still worth asking. And so, like, for people that still consider themselves Christians but they do not find the Trinity compelling, the Trinity was not even a conversation worth having if it weren't for the earlier conversation of what do we do with this person of Jesus that has seemed to be so impactful. And that question is still worth asking for Christian people, regardless of what they think about the Trinity. And the conclusion that they come to with that question is a valuable one for Christians. I find myself returning to the questions of like, what do I do with the reality of other deity in the Hebrew scriptures? What do I do with the what do I do with the reality that the person of the God of the Bible seems to in history have had a physical body in different kind of literature? What do I do with the reality that this deity seems to have not always been the head honcho in different texts? So what it has done is made me feel like I'm watching the second season of a really good show where they're actually gonna, it's not just the story of this one kingdom, it's the story of all the kingdoms. It's the story of the whole world. And I'm much more curious and so much less afraid now when it comes to exploring the notion of deity, singular and plural, than I used to
I
be.
I absolutely love this for you. I really do. I spend a lot of my time on this app in interfaith panels, which again, I think God went bet when in yeshiva I said that's never going to happen. And that's really the bread and butter of my work now is I try to tell people that very thing, being curious and asking the questions is how we get to the answer. We if we just want the answer and we say this is the answer, but I'm not going to interrogate that answer. I'm not going to interrogate my own questioning, then you're going to settle for the bare minimum. In my spirituality, I don't want to experience bare minimum. I want to experience my religion, my faith, and my own spirituality in the fullness of what I can have. How big of an experience with deity, with the universe can I have while I'm here?
I love that. I want to leave you with one thing because that reminded me of something
Absolutely.
that I think is just really important. Um, I think we love answers as if they do something for us when they don't.
Yep.
Answers don't help. Like I forget where I heard it, but someone said, "What's the meaning of life?" And someone said, "I could tell you, but the answer won't matter." It's like, why won't the answer matter? It's because the answer isn't compelling. It's the journey within embodying that reality. The doing of the thing that creates the answer is what makes the answer valuable. Um, like the question, "Do I love my neighbor?" should not lead to the answer yes. It should be, what am I doing right now that helps me answer that question? Like how am I embodying the answer I hope to be true? That is such a better way to operate in life than to find the answer. So instead of jumping from one answer to another, instead of yes, it's no, let's return to the question and live
Absolutely.
out the answer we hope is most true. Perhaps we
Absolutely.
will have a better. Perhaps everyone would have a better life if we
I
approach from that curiosity.
I love this and I absolutely adore you. You were actually the first person that I thought of when I thought of doing this series. I was like, I know someone immediately that I want to have this conversation with. So you have no idea how honored I am that you said yes and said, yes, I'd love to spend time doing this with you. Because I know a lot of people who are still in the beginning of it, like, no, just I'm still working through it. So the
That means a
fact that you
lot.
did this with me, I don't, I'm not crying on live, but you get it.
No, this meant a lot to me that you asked, and I debated on whether or not I could do this and it be meaningful for you. But I really appreciate you inviting me into it.
I
Um,
I appreciate you. Like
I appreciate you.
the amount of things that we have experienced together over the course of our friendship has helped me realize that I can have actual friends. It's something my wife had to point. Sorry, something my wife had to point out to me. I've always been afraid of friendships, especially friendships with the opposite sex, because you know. So My wife has reminded me, I don't think you realize that you actually have friends. And she'll say, have you checked in on Andrew? And I'm like, I'm going to do that right now.
It sounds like your wife and my partner are in the same group chat. It's yeah, I have to remind myself that I'm liked.
Yep.
And
And
that
not
people
liked for
want
the
to be my
things
friend.
we
Yeah.
used to think we were liked for.
Yeah. It's odd when you've been rejected in other spaces to then realize you're valuable in new ones. The heart takes a while to catch up to that.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
All right.
I
Well,
really appreciate you.
I appreciate you joining me. You have no idea. I'm going to have this probably on my YouTube. I'm going to edit a little because, the little one, I don't like to try and put her up on anywhere on internet just because of her age, and I'm overprotective. I
110 respect. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a really good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.